Welcome back to Indianomics. We have been discussing the likely success rate of the Uday reforms announced by the central government for power distribution companies. My guests now are people who will actually be impacted by the reforms. Mr. Ajay Jain, the Energy Secretary of Andhra Pradesh, and Sanjay Sagar, Joint Managing Director and CEO of JSW Energy. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Mr. Jain, the discussion that we left off with the former power secretaries raised the question, does the central government or the banks have any control over the control of AT&C losses? Can power theft be stopped by these entities? They have no power. Do you think that part of the Uday reforms can succeed?
Actually, the scheme envisages additional support by the center to the states, those who are accepting the scheme and of course performing also as per the standards. Now, for example, the scheme talks about additional funding, priority funding through the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Jyoti Yojana or the Power System Development Fund or the IPDS. So I think it's a very good incentive for the states to support the scheme and achieve the targets. It also talks about additional coal support at notified prices, which is a big incentive for the state. So I think these two factors of additional grants or additional support through central schemes as well as additional coal and then low cost power allocation through NTPC and other central generating stations. So I think these are big incentives. I mean, they may not be directly in the form of control, but they're in the form of the incentives. And ultimately, reduction of the losses, as you rightly said, it is within the domain of the state governments, and the DISCOMs for their own operational efficiencies, they have to take steps to reduce the losses, and this central support will definitely go a long way in achieving the target.
Okay. No, actually the incentives under APDRP were always available. Do you think now the center can say that if I don't see your AT&C losses down by at least 1 percentage point, I will stop all funding? Can they actually take that position?
You see, actually in a federal setup, I mean, total stoppage of funding may not be possible, but then definitely the additional funding to the performing states itself is a big incentive. And I think, more than the center acting as a watchdog or the big brother, I think it's like what the Honorable Prime Minister has been saying, the Team India thing. So, the states have to perform, irrespective of whether they can stop or they do not stop or they give additional funding. It is in the state's interest to perform well, and this additional support by the center only adds incentive to that. So, I'm definitely sure. See, even with the FRP 2012 also, some of the states have definitely benefited. So I think that with this additional support, the states will take action, the DISCOMs also, to reduce their AT&C losses.
Okay. Well, let me come to Sanjay. Do you expect, with the losses having gone down or completely wiped out actually, because the state governments will take over the losses and debt, that any state electricity board will put out a PPA? When is the earliest you are expecting further purchase of power, Sanjay?
Well, Lata, I fully share the apprehensions of the two former secretaries. It's a very tall order for the states. Taking on the entire debt onto their balance sheets, and then what Ajay has listed out is all the carrots which the center is offering them. However, I really don't see a situation where, as Ajay said, the center says, all right, no more funding. Because in a country like India, you can't allow the DISCOMs to go down completely. So you'll have to make sure that the DISCOMs keep on operating. And as you very rightly pointed out, some of these incentives have been in place for a very long time. But it has not had much impact on the performance of the DISCOMs. Secondly, what Ajay just said was that it's in the interest of the state, of the DISCOMs, to carry out the reforms. Well, I would like to say that, it has always been in the interest of the DISCOMs to have carried out the reforms. It was the political will to an extent which was missing. And however, I do not want to, in any way sort of belittle the effort or the scheme which the center has offered. I don't think they could have done better than this.
Okay. But coming to the point, do you expect, when is the earliest you expect that anybody will put out a PPA?
Well, to my mind, not before 6 months.
Well, a final question to you, Mr. Jain. What if the center said that the banks will not fund losses after this year? This is the last, FY16 is the last. Would it work?
Yeah, that is what. See, ultimately centre has a control indirectly through RBI and the banks, because ultimately when the DISCOMs were borrowing money in that phase from 2011 onwards, they were resorting to the loans from the banks for funding their operational inefficiency and the losses. If it stops to that, then we may come to a situation wherein the DISCOMs do not purchase power and then they do not supply to the consumers as well. Then it would be the consumers who will take the biggest hit, in the sense that if banks do not fund the losses of the DISCOMs, then they would not be purchasing power and supplying power.
So that stick may work.
Consumers will suffer. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the thing, it may work. But then, ultimately then, but that thing hurts the consumers as well.
Okay. Final question to you, Sanjay. We've already had a 2003 plan and a 2013 plan. Will 2016 be an improvement?
Well, the plan is certainly more robust than the two earlier plans. However, there is one aspect that I would like to sort of bring out here. You know, I was going through some analyst reports recently and I discovered that in FY15, Coal India has operated on an ROE of 34%. Now, if Coal India, which is a monopoly created by the Government of India, is going to supply coal to the generating companies or the state DISCOMs or whatever you may have, at an ROE of 34%, I really don't see how the consumer is not going to be burdened. And I personally don't see any justification when the generators are operating at a regulated ROE of 15.5%. Why should the monopoly coal supplier in the country be allowed to operate at 34% ROE?
Very interesting question.
So probably the government also needs to have a look at that when they talk about, not burdening the consumer.
Okay.
Beyond the point.
Okay, Mr. Jain, Sanjay Sagar, thank you very much for joining me out of time. Well, the key takeaways from all my four guests. One, this plan also has to be constantly monitored. We can't expect the scheme to succeed just because the plan is in place. Two, there is no way for the centre actually to ensure that the AT&C losses or the power theft will come down. We still are dependent on the DISCOMs and the state governments implementing it in good faith. Three, the quarterly revision of tariffs must be ensured so that the tariff revisions don't become big. If they are quarterly, the revisions are likely to be small. There is no clout with the centre to ensure that this process is not politicized. Four, banks can be a very powerful way to ensure that this quarterly revisions take place. Banks and the central government through the banks have to be vigilant. And finally, Coal India should ensure that it provides the coal at a cheaper price. Its ROE, as the power generator pointed out, is much higher than the return on equity of the power distribution companies. That's something for the centre to mull over. That's it on this edition of Indianomics. Thanks for watching.